I want to start by saying I'm not the kind of man who scares easy. 32 years I've lived in these mountains. I know their sounds, their moods, the way fog settles into the hollows before a rain. I've hunted these ridgelines since I was 9 years old. I've slept under open sky in November without a tent and walked home in the dark more times than I can count. What I'm about to tell you changed all of that, and I haven't been back to that ridge since. It was late October, 3 years ago now. My buddy Dale and I had planned a 4-day backcountry deer hunt up on a stretch of national forest land above Straight Creek. Remote country, the kind where cell service drops out completely about 2 miles in. We'd hunted it before, maybe 6 or 7 times over the years, and never had a single problem. Beautiful country, old growth timber up on the ridges, good water, deer trails cutting through the laurel thickets like highways. We set up camp the first evening in a flat clearing just below the tree line, maybe 400 feet from a dry creek bed. Nothing unusual. We ate, talked a while, turned in early. I fell asleep listening to the wind move through the pines and thought, as I always do out there, that there's no better place on earth. I woke up at 2:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I checked my watch immediately. Some sound had pulled me out of sleep. Not a crash, not a snap of a branch. Something else. A pressure in the air. A wrongness. The kind of feeling that reaches down into some animal part of you that hasn't changed in 10,000 years and tells you to be very, very still. I lay in my sleeping bag and listened. Silence. Complete silence. No wind, no insects, nothing. If you spent any real time in the woods, you know that silence like that isn't natural. The mountains are never that quiet. There's always something. A creek murmuring somewhere, an owl, the shuffle of a small animal through dead leaves. That silence wasn't the absence of sound, it was the suppression of it. Like everything out there had decided, at exactly the same moment, to hold its breath. Then I heard it. It came from the tree line, about 60 or 70 yards to the north. Not quite a sound, more like a displacement of air. A low, rhythmic exhalation. Not an animal I recognized. Not a bear, not a coyote, not a buck blowing. I've heard all of those things. This was deeper, slower. Whatever was making that sound had lungs much larger than any animal I'd ever encountered in these mountains. It came again, closer. I reached out in the dark and grabbed Dale's arm. He was already awake, already rigid. He'd heard it too. We didn't speak. Neither of us moved. The dark inside the tent was total. No moonlight, clouds covering everything, and for a long moment there was only that breathing, slow and enormous, moving along the tree line from north to east, walking parallel to our camp. Whatever it was tracking the edge of the clearing deliberately. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound, because in that silence, something shifted. There was a moment where the air changed, where I became absolutely certain, with no logical basis I can name, that something very large, standing somewhere just beyond the tent wall, had turned and was now facing us directly. I have never felt anything like it in my life, not before, not since. Pure animal recognition of being watched by something that means you harm. Then came the footsteps. Not the soft crunch of deer moving through leaves, not the loping gait of a bear. These were deliberate, heavy, bipedal, moving toward the camp with a slow, unhurried confidence that was more terrifying than any charge or rush could have been. It stopped just outside the tent, 8 feet maybe, 10. The breathing had a wet, labored quality up close, like air being forced through something damaged or wrong. It breathed in, held it, breathed out through what sounded like several apertures at once.
I had my rifle. I could have unzipped the tent. I did not, because some absolute certainty told me that opening that tent was the last thing I would ever do.
At some point, an hour or more into that stillness, the breathing receded, gradually, methodically, like it was walking backward. And then the insects started again, all at once, as though a switch had been thrown. The wind came back through the pines, and the mountain sounded like itself again. Dale and I were out of that camp before dawn, gear half-packed, moving in the dark with headlamps. We didn't speak until we reached the truck. We didn't speak about it for several weeks. When we finally did, sitting at Dale's kitchen table, we discovered we had experienced exactly the same thing, the same sensations, the same certainty, the same absolute refusal to open that tent. We found the ground around our camp in the daylight before we left. On the north side of the clearing, the soil was disturbed in a way I couldn't account for. No clear print, the ground was too dry and hard for that, but the leaf litter had been pressed down in a way that suggested tremendous weight, distributed over 2 points, spaced wide, wider than any man's stride. And on a birch tree at the edge of the clearing, about 7.5 feet off the ground, the bark had been stripped clean in 3 long parallel marks, removed as cleanly as if someone had run a blade along the wood. People want an answer. Bigfoot, they say, or a bear rearing up, or suggestion, 2 grown men scaring themselves in the dark. I've held every one of those explanations up against what I felt that morning, looking at those marks on the birch tree. None of them fit. What I know is this: there are places in these mountains that are old in a way that resists explanation. Something lives there that has no name in any field guide. Something that was here long before the first settlers pushed into these hollows, and that will be here long after the last of us are gone. I walked into one of those places on a Tuesday night in October. I was lucky enough to walk back out. Not everyone does. If you've had an experience in the Appalachian Mountains you can't explain, leave it in the comments. You're not alone.